Throughout the course of the semester, I researched how psychological aspects of sport have influenced athlete and coach. I've conducted my own interviews and done my own research, and to help me analyze that data and opinions I found from other athletes and coaches, I welcome Hastings College Doctor of Psychology, Mark Zajack.
Thanks, Dan.
Dr. Zajack, you offer a course called Moneyball Revolution, Football and Basketball Analysis, and are a fan of both sport and psychology. How much do you feel psychology has on sport and its participants?
We like to think of psychology as the study of behavior. So what better way to study it than when we have an arena in which to study behavior, where there are a set amount of rules and participants are essentially performing on an equal playing field. So there's a huge influence of psychology on sports, and it's always been an interesting way to look at psychological problems, to study it in that arena.
One thing that I found that I want to talk to you first about deals with the emotions that go on throughout play. I found similarities with Alex Geyer, our goalkeeper, and Coach Tony Harper, our football coach. They both said they have two sides of their emotion often when they play or during sport. How much emotion in sport is psychological, and why does it impact athletes and coaches so much throughout a game?
It's a really interesting question, and there are probably a lot of pro sports teams that wish they could give the best answer to that question. It's so hard to measure because we are these emotional beings, and emotions can affect us. One of the interesting psychological studies has been the study of this concept called flow, where when people are at their peak motivational state, they're said to be in this state of flow, and they almost they don't report feeling any emotion. They don't report thinking about the passage of time or thinking about distractions. They get that kind of tunnel vision when we're just, we're focused on something, we're performing at a high level, and we feel challenged in that arena. And when people, it seems like from the study of flow, that when people can kind of get their emotions to the right point where they cease to think about them, then maybe they are performing at their best. Maybe before a game you get pumped up and you get emotional, but then during the game you kind of go into that autopilot, that good sort of autopilot where your emotions aren't affecting your behavior. So that's the interesting question, is how to measure that.
Right. One thing that I found really interesting when talking to head women's basketball coach Carrie Hofstetter was that she thought there was a different psychology when it comes to motivating female athletes compared to male athletes. She said that female athletes really need something to attach to be motivated. As if figuring out the psychology of athletics wasn't confusing enough, do you feel that there are different psychologies for men and women in sport?
I wonder if that's true. I mean, you do hear about coaches, even when they're dealing with one gender, saying that they treat different players differently. I think of Bill Parcells, who has a Hastings College tie. When I would read interviews with Bill Parcells, he said that there are certain players that he would just lay into at the drop of a hat. They made a tiny mistake in practice and he would just go crazy on them. And then other players were a little different emotionally, just wired a little differently, and he knew that he had to encourage them when they were doing poorly. It seems like Carrie has kind of, perceived that in her teams, just in experiencing the different things that motivate different people, seeing that for some people the team bond is the most important thing. If you can play into that, then that emotional bond of, I'm going to perform well, but I'm going to do it because I don't want to let my teammates down. And then someone else might be wired a little bit differently and just be like, I want to perform well because that's important to me, and that's what's driving me. So maybe those personality differences could be gender-based. That's a cool question. Yeah.
One thing that I find very psychological in sport is self-talk and mental imagery. I feel that it is very psychological. What does self-visualization do for the athlete physically as they go through their actions mentally? Does it have a cause and effect almost?
I think so. I think the way, there are a few different brain regions that we can talk about that are probably most likely enacted when people are going through that visualization process. One of the things that it may affect is something that we call mirror neurons in psychology, where you don't actually have to be performing a behavior for your brain to act like you're performing it. So if you watch someone else raise their hand or shoot a free throw, you can imagine doing that, and some of the same brain processes that would happen when you shoot a free throw are taking place in your mind. So by someone sitting there and, visualizing the way they want to perform on the field, on the court, they're actually giving their brain a run through of what they're going to be doing on that field. It's almost like some of the benefits of meditation. Mm-hmm. People who practice meditation, we see great amounts of activity in certain parts of the brain, and that benefits their, we see people who meditate tend to be happier, tend to maybe perform better and concentrate a little bit better. And so maybe that's the athlete's version of meditation, knowing how to quiet the brain to the point where they can concentrate on one thing and only one thing.
One thing I talked with a lot of coaches and athletes about, and they recognize, concentration is such a key part of the game. You have to be focused on the task at hand and what they're doing, but many times athletes lose focus for whatever reason, whether it be within themselves or within the environment. With the confidence level that an athlete might have, does that kind of coincide with the concentration and whether they're able to regain that concentration in competition? Because there are athletes that can lose concentration and that totally ruins them for the game.
Right. I think that the key would be a level of confidence. In psychology, we'd use the term self-efficacy, how well you feel you perform at that task. So it's kind of a combination of confidence in the task and a level of self-esteem. So when people have this high self-efficacy, we probably translate in like sports jargon to being a player who has a short memory. So sometimes that's the player's job, right? But sometimes it could be the coach's job as well to, some coaches, operate a little bit differently and maybe are the yellers who are going to jump on somebody, and, maybe that works. Maybe that, gets the athlete's attention. They're like, okay, I'm good now. I'm okay. And some other coaches might take the approach of like, asking them, well, what happened there? And through them, saying, okay, here's what happened and here's what I'm going to do to stop it next, they kind of reassert their confidence. And I think that's a big part of coaching, is just refocusing the players after, nothing's going to go perfectly. Like you're not going to have a perfect game. Maybe in baseball, I guess pitchers have had perfect games, but for the most part, and then the coaches don't talk to them, right? They just ignore them in the dugout. Right. But yeah, for the most part, that's what life is. That's what sport is like you make a mistake and then you learn from it, and hopefully you move on. And that's what, as people get more and more confident, get higher self-efficacy, that's what they're able to do to the best of their ability, and that's what makes them, a great player and perform well, I think.
Well, that's all I've got for you, Dr. Zajack. Thank you so much for meeting with me and helping me understand the psychology of athletics and how everything works. I am Dan Miller, and this is my study of psychology and college athletics.